Six Ages Gaming is brought to you by GamersGauntlet.net. Check them out for all your singles, sealed product, and playmats.
Hello and welcome to the last, the final, the end of the road for the Final Fantasy Opus 1 set review. We are going to be ending it out with Water, which for all the blue mages out there, if you love unsummoning your opponent's stuff or bouncing it back to their hand and really having some tempo-y plays, then this is the color or the element for you. Let's get right into this. So up first, we have a 5-drop Agrius? I can't even talk. It is super late. It's an EX 6K with first strike, so it's a bit undercosted, but it does have first strike, so that helps us out a little bit. But EX burst, when it enters the field, you may search for one card named Ovelia, and add it to your hand. So anytime that you get a card back to your hand after playing one, that definitely helps reduce that cost quite a bit. Now, I will give you the heads up, and we will see that card in a little bit, that I looked at kind of it's a 3-card combo, if I'm not mistaken. And ultimately, I just didn't like them. If you're playing a mono water deck and you want to play into this night theme, then sure, but ultimately, I think that it falls a little short, even with the opportunity to get a card back. Up next, we have Ultimacia. Definitely going in boss mode here. 5-drop, 9K. Fairly decent stats. All forwards other than Ultimacia enter the field dull. And then time compression special. Remember, you have to discard another Ultimacia to get that effect. And 3 water. Freeze all forwards other than Ultimacia. This is a card that I am still having a love-hate relationship with. The disadvantage here is that your guys will come into play dull as well. So if, depending on when you play this, it could set you up for some awkward tempo plays. However, you must then immediately consider that, yes, you are playing water, so you have things like Leviathan, you have Yuna, you have Shuyin, I think is his name. You have several cards which are going to either activate or untap your characters forwards, rather, specifically, or you have ways that are going to bounce your opponent's stuff back to their hand and, really set them back even more. So I like this idea that you can play an Ultimacia in a deck, but if I do this, I would strongly recommend playing 3 Fairy and 3 Leviathan right off the bat, and we will see those cards here in a moment. And then time compression to freeze. That's something else that I really like. Your opponent's stuff is coming into play dulled, and at a key point, you can say, you know what, I'm going to freeze them now. So not only do they come into play dulled, you're still not going to get them the next turn. And then maybe on the 3rd turn, if you don't chain another time compression or some other effect, their units are still going to be dulled. So I think Ultimacia, it's a little lacking right now simply because the card pool is fairly restricted with what we have. But I am very much looking forward to seeing which way this card goes. I think it has a ton of potential, but right now it's going to be a very dedicated deck, and you're going to be spending a lot of cards if you want to build it. That said, sure, it might see some play in some other water decks, maybe as just a tech 1 or 2 of, simply because of how good that effect can be, but ultimately I think you want to be running 3 of these, running the 2-drop unit backup that reduces the cost of all your water summons, and then you can play the water summons, which we will talk about in a minute. Up next, we have Alma. This is another card that plays into the combo we were previously talking about. It's a 3-drop backup. If you can control a card Ovelia, the cost of playing Alma onto the field is reduced by 1. Dull, draw a card, then discard a card from your hand. Now, in this game, you are drawing 2 cards a turn, so natural filtering, what we're used to other card games, which is only 1 per turn. This card is still a very strong effect. With being a 3 cost, it's probably about where it should be, even if you're not playing Ovelia. But I'm not so solid or so sold on the idea that this is going to fit into a deck. I didn't have it in my first draft, but I think this is a card that I'm going to play with going forward once I have a bit more time to brew. I think it certainly has potential in the right decks, and anyone who wants to play a water-based control deck, being able to find your Moogles or your Leviathans is really going to help accelerate your game plan, and Alma lets you do that. Next we have Van, however you want to pronounce him, 5-drop 6,000, so a little bit undercosted, but again, when he enters the field, you draw a card. So keeping in mind, if we look at this strictly from the viewpoint of, Yes, he costs more, so you're going to discard a card, but you do get to draw a card when he enters. And anytime you draw a card, it's effectively 2 crystal points that you could produce. So effectively, he is a 3-drop. And then when Van forms a parting text, draw 1 card, then discard 1 card from your hand. So again, very much like Alma, it doesn't give you card advantage per se, but it does give you card filtering, which can matter a great deal in this game and help you find those summons. I think it's really important that you have to form a party with him, and you'll see in a moment that we do have a few cards that let him swing for damage and hopefully not have to worry about losing him. But ultimately, even if he gets, even that first attack, he still gets to filter at least 1 card. So I think this is a pretty great card, actually. I'm pretty excited for this one. I think it's going to be in a very interesting deck that it goes with, because you want to be able to party attack with stuff, so that's something that you have to keep in mind. But I definitely can see this card being played going forward. Up next, we have Warrior of Light. It's a 4-drop 8K. Again, pretty standard spot to be. But the job standard unit forwards you control gain plus 2,000 power and first strike. So a little history on this card. The power and the cost stayed the same. It used to be a light card, and now they switched it to water. Now we will see a few standard units coming up, but every element has standard unit forwards that can be used with this card. That said, I think water has the best setup overall, and I'd probably argue say, mono water deck with Warrior of Light, and I think it's Waka is the backup that gives plus 1,000 power to all water forwards. And you can just really have this ability where suddenly all your standard units are getting plus 3,000 power and first strike, which you'll see here in a moment is a very sweet spot for them to be in. So I kind of put together a rough list for a mono water Warrior of Light, and I really like it. I'm actually looking forward to testing this deck and seeing how it does. Then we have Avelia, finally the other 2-drop that we mentioned. The other backup that goes to the other cards. It's a 2-drop, good spot to be in. Backup, Job Knight forward, you control gain plus 1,000 power. If you're playing the Warrior of Light deck, you're probably playing this card because the 2 knights that you'll play are quite good for what they do. However, this card otherwise falls short. So if you want to play the mono water Warrior of Light standard unit deck, which again very heavily revolves around having a Warrior of Light in play, so you want to play Cecil, we'll get to that in a moment. I think there's definitely some synergy that goes in, but it's going to require you to play mono water, so keep that in mind. Up next we have Scholar. 2-drop backup, again, good spot to be in. Has the 3 card icons, you can play multiple in field at a time. Dull, put it into your break zone, choose 1 forward you control, return it to your hand. This has quite a few different things that it can do. As you see here with Cloud of Darkness, you can return Cloud of Darkness to your hand, and effectively what this allows you to do is 2 things. 1, lets you buy back forwards in such that if they have a very strong enter the field effect, you can effectively reuse it by sacrificing your Scholar, getting the forward back to your hand, and playing that effect again. It also allows them to dodge removal. If your opponent tries to play an Odin, for example, to remove it, you can say, no sir, I'm going to banish my Scholar and return this to my hand, and your spell will do, in fact, nothing. And in this game, where you're discarding cards to have to play a majority of your cards per turn, Scholar can really cause your opponent to negative. So if we see a very summon-heavy meta, or if we see a lot of things that are different backups that'll break forwards, I think Scholar can certainly see some play as well. I don't like the fact that that you have to tap and put in the break zone, but if you think about the fact you get to play this early, use it for a couple turns, set up your board, and then once you've established a board presence or have the forwards on field that you care about, then you can use Scholar, then you can break it, and then you can free up some other back row spaces for some other backups you want to play. So overall, I think this card is going to be seeing quite a bit of play. I was actually, pretty impressed with it, and I think it definitely is going to have some potential. Definitely keep in mind, again, anytime a card that has an a forward specifically, that's really important. Anytime a forward has a strong enter the field effect, immediately think of this card's Scholar. So about that, Cloud of Darkness, 6-drop, 7,000 power, so a little bit, under the power of what it should be, but when Cloud of Darkness enters the field, each player selects 1 forward he or she controls. all forwards that were not selected are put into the break zone. So Cloud of Darkness is a great option if your opponent plays, 4 characters out on the board, and you only had maybe say a Squall or some other blocker that was holding it down. You could then play Cloud of Darkness and force them to keep only one of their characters. Now, naturally, they're only going to keep their best one, so that can cause a problem if they have like a 9k on field. But that's where I want to go back to this mono water deck. If you're playing like a Warrior of Light and a bunch of standard units that get increased power, you can wrath the board with Cloud of Darkness and then rebuild your board up with some pretty effective and cheap forwards that are going to be very, very strong. And then they can also benefit from a card called Minwoo, which we will talk about in a moment. And it really creates an awkward situation for your opponent where they can't attack and they don't want to overextend because you might play another Cloud of Darkness to reset their board. So it really helps play into that control element, and you'll see that water has both a tempo aspect to it and a control aspect. And again, I'm really happy with what Square Enix did in giving each element 2 main themes that goes with it. Now, I guess the one exception there you could say is Earth, but they kind of go together in the same aspect anyways with what they are trying to do, because the cards are just very versatile in what they're doing. So going on, we have Evoker, 1-drop backup. Again, won't spend a lot of time on this. Vanilla, don't play it, don't like it. There's other things you can be doing. Then we have 2-drop Gordon, forward 4k, kind of meh stats. Dull, the next damage dealt to Gordon this becomes 0 this turn. This is a very, very strong control-based card. So if you're playing a deck that wants to resolve things like Cloud of Darkness, where you need to build up some board, maybe your opponent has to overextend, Gordon is a very good card for that, because no matter what they play, or I should say, no matter what fort they attack with, you could effectively block and then dull him to hopefully prevent that damage. Now keep in mind that there is a sequence before damage is dealt where you go to block, use his effect, and then they could then in turn, and with priority sequences still being cleared up, but the way that the stack resolves is you can add it at any add and take away at any point. So you could dull, you could let that resolve, and then Ifrit before damage is assigned through the block. So there are ways to still kill Gordon. Ifrit and Shiva I think can also hit dull. Ram is active. So there are ways to get around this card, but it's still going to make it very awkward for your opponent. Or if they're wasting a removal spell on a 2-drop, you're probably still coming out ahead as well. So again, keep in mind with the priority sequence, and we will hopefully get more details about that once the priority sequence and advanced rules are out, but to the best of my knowledge, that is how it's going to work, because that is how it would work in Magic. So using my expertise from there, I think that's how that effect would resolve, and I'll make sure to type something out just in case that wasn't clear. Then we have White Mage, 2-drop backup. Again, always a great spot to be in. When White Mage enters a field, choose 1 forward and activate it. So this is just great. It allows you to attack. Maybe you need to be a little aggressive for a turn, get that point of damage in. And then during your second main phase, or second active phase, you can play the White Mage, make your forward active, and then it can block on your next turn. So White Mage is just a great card to be playing. And then it also allows you to do some stuff like if you have a Tifa for whatever reason, you can attack. It won't get to attack twice, but then you don't have to worry about them playing one of a couple of the removal spells. So it all depends on what element they're playing, but White Mage certainly has some utility to it as well. Another card that they had ended up changing over from light to an element, we have Cecil as a 5-drop. So 5-drop AK, a little higher on the cost, but summons or abilities of your opponents must choose Cecil if possible. This card is absolutely great in the right decks. You'll see in a moment we have a card called Titus that has a very combo-y function to it. And Cecil essentially acts as his Thunder Rod, saying, hey, you must target me, you must deal with me first, or I will get to have this combo and it will go uninterrupted because you must remove Cecil first. So he is great at preventing a wall that your opponent has to answer or has to deal with in fear of. If you're playing Titus, you can just play the combo and potentially kill your opponent out of nowhere. So I think Cecil is going to see a ton of play going forward. And I think also in the multicolor Earth decks that are playing like Shantaro and maybe Chaos or Cosmos to get the last color splash, Cecil is very easily a splashable card I would want to see in those decks as well. So that is something that I'm looking forward to. Speaking of which, here he finally is. the 4-drop Titus, or Titus, however you want to pronounce it. Forward for each forward other than Titus you control, gain plus 1,000 power. That's a very strong effect in itself because, again, keep in mind, 8,000 is usually the sweet spot, but if you have 2 other forwards, you get them to 9k, even better. And then you have Blitz Ace. Special 2 water until end of turn, Titus gains Brave. Titus can attack as many times as your point of damage this turn. So if you're at 6 damage, he can attack 6 times. And turns out, you're playing water, so if you really wanted to, you could set this up one of 2 ways. You could play Cloud of Darkness, where your opponent only has 1 blocker, and then play Titus on your next turn, and maybe you're playing Lightning to give him haste, and then you could give him haste and attack, and they're going to have maybe 1, maybe 2 blockers on field. And if he's a 9k, he's probably going to be able to handle both of those, or better yet, you can bounce one of them in water. If you're playing Lightning, you can also maybe have an Odin to clear the way. There is a lot of things that this card can do. Now, I think that this is still a very powerful legend card. Don't get me wrong, you'll see that L in the bottom and the middle, but it does require a lot of other cards to combo with it. So I'm not going to say it's one of the most powerful legends in terms of like top 3, but it is certainly top 5 worthy for the fact that it can just close out a game out of nowhere in a single turn if you're playing the right elements. So definitely keep an eye on that. I am so happy that they made it Dissidia Final Fantasy X or 10 because you can't use Brother to search up Blitz Ace, but you can use Brother to switch up the other 4-drop Titus, which we'll talk about in a second, to then use his Blitz Ace effect. So that is something to consider as well. But overall, just this is the fact that he powers up with some of your other guys, and he's just such an amazing card late game, has a lot of things going for him. And then we have another 4-drop version of him, again 8k here. When he attacks, all water forwards you control gain plus 1,000 power until end of turn. If you're playing the Mono Water version of this deck, and you have Minwoo, which is coming up here pretty soon, this is a very, very strong effect. You can effectively give your guys plus 2k between this and the water backup, which can make Minwoo very, very aggravating for your opponents. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Again, you're probably going to be playing 2 elements, and there's just not enough room to be running both of these. I'd probably run 3 Blitz Ace and 1 of the Power Buffer, but that's about as high as I would go. But again, Mono Water has some very interesting options with it. So talking about those standard units from earlier, we have some Knights. 2-drop Knight, 5k, pretty decent stats. The forwards forming a party with Knight don't receive any damage. That alone is a very interesting effect. If you remember Van, we saw that when he had party attacks, you get to draw a card and discard a card. So even if you're losing your Knight, that means on your next turn you'll still get another, I'm going to call it a filter trigger, if you will, off Van to be able to do that again. So Knight here is really coming together, and if you're playing Warrior of Light in play, plus you have the other backup, he's effectively an 8k first strike, and his partner doesn't take damage. That is just a very, very good card to have. And then we see the 1-drop version that does the same exact thing, but it's only 3,000 power. I don't like the 1-drop only because the numbers don't line up the same way. It only becomes a 6k, which is a bit difficult. It's not a good spot to be. You really want to be at 7 at a bare minimum, and then 8 is, again, kind of the sweet spot that we've been talking about in all of our videos. Now, the thing to note here, and we are still trying to clear this up, but in theory this should work this way. If both of these Knights form a party, they should not be able to, or you can't break them, or they cannot be broken, I guess I should say. They don't receive any damage. Now, again, this is something that we're trying to hopefully clear up in the comprehensive rules once it's out, but from the best that I can tell, that is how this interaction will work. Now, before everyone says that, oh, it's broken and all that jazz, keep in mind that you are losing 2 potential forwards from attacking that become 1, and they only deal 1 point of damage. Now, that said, you are pressuring your opponent with a combined power of 8,000, and again, if you have Waka as a backup, you're then very quickly looking at a 10k, and that's going to be pushing through for damage every single turn that your opponent is going to have to answer one way or another. So in that regard, it's good, and that's why I really want to try the Warrior of Light, standard unit deck, and I think it's going to be good for some laughs. Competitively speaking, it's probably going to be a little bit lacking because you need to find both these combo pieces. It's a little bit slower than what you might hope for. It heavily relies on things like Leviathan to bounce their blockers or to just give you a couple turns to set up. So that might be a little upsetting, yes, but it's still a very cute interaction, and it could definitely be some fun if you have Warrior of Light on the field. Then we have Viking, again, another standard unit, keep that in mind. 2-drop, you can have multiple on the field. It's only a 1k, but the interesting point here is that when it enters the field, you get to draw a card. So you're spending a card to play him, and you get to draw a card when he comes into play. So you do have, and it's still technically -1 because you play him, and then you only get to draw one card, and you probably pitch a card to play him, but getting to have that filtering option is very, very important in the deck. Now, between these, and I'm probably going to be leaning a little bit more towards Geomancer. It's a 3-drop 6,000, so it would have been nice to be a 7, but 6 is probably balanced. When Geomancer is put from field into the breakstone, draw a card. Again, going back to the Warrior of Light, it would become an 8k, and then with the backup, it becomes a 9k. So that is a great spot to be in again. Again, potentially a 9k 3-drop that when it dies, you get to draw a card. So even if you're trading with one of their 9ks that they dumped a bunch of resources into, you're still going to get to draw a card and be feeling pretty good about that trade that you just made. Now again, this is going to be focused on a very heavy, most likely mono water deck when you're playing all these standard units, but it is certainly going to be a fun deck, and I personally love playing blue cards, so I will be trying this at least once. Another just great filtering option for water is a 2-drop Geomancer. So again, 2-drop, great spot to be in because you can play it turn 1, and then it has the effect to dull and look at the top card of your deck, and if you don't like it, you can place it on the bottom. Now, this is exceptionally great because you can do this in response to combat as well. Let's say we know that we're playing, we'll use Lightning and Water, for example, and I know that somewhere in my deck there's going to be an Odin. Now keep in mind this is a May effect, so I can, in theory, my opponent goes to attack, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to probably, or even before if you decide if you want to block or not, you can say, you know what, hold on, I'm going to look at the top card of my deck. If it's an EX, I'm going to let that attack connect because then I know how the next turn is going to go. Or if it's not an EX, you filter to the bottom in hopes that the next card is an EX. And again, keeping in mind that EX effects are generally cards that you want to be playing for free, like Fairy on the right here, that's a pretty good spot to be in. You would get to then activate one of your forwards and draw another card. So if my opponent is essentially giving me extra cards when they're attacking, I'm feeling pretty good about that. So ultimately, I think Geomancer, I want to say it goes in every single water deck just because, again, it's a 2-drop, which is a very good spot to be. You must play a 2-drop backup in your deck. Please keep that in mind. And then the filtering option, if you're playing a heavy EX deck, which if you're playing water, you almost certainly are, there's just a lot of good things that you can do with it. So I think Geomancer is a card that I don't see a lot of people talking about right now, or at least at the time of the recording late at night, but I think more people should be looking into this card. And then we have Fairy, 2-drop EX, so again, if you reveal it off damage, if it's a top card of your deck, you get the effect for free. Choose one forward, activate it, and draw a card. So this is great because you can kind of surprise your opponent and then get to block one of their forwards that they might not have been expecting. And then you also get to draw a card. So let's say that we discarded a card to play it. We then get to draw another card. Let's say we had an extra backup that was unique that we can't play. Well, might as well toss it away and play the summon because then we get to draw another card. We just get to filter through our deck quicker, and really that's the main attraction to water, is being able to get through your deck quicker and really get to find those combo pieces that you're looking for. So I'm very much looking forward to playing this card and just seeing the kind of potential that it truly has. And wow, these actually landed on the same slide. These are probably my 2 favorite cards out of water. 3-drop Minwoo. The forwards you control don't receive damage that is less than their power. That is just insane. So, keeping in mind that we've been talking about this mono water element, if your opponent attacks with, let's say, an 8, a 7, a 7, and a 7, let's just say they have infinite number of 7s, and if you have a 9k on the field, your 9k can then block every single forward that they try to attack with. Now, a lot of people have been saying that backup destruction isn't going to be important. Sephiroth won't be playable because he costs too much. Well, folks, here is the main answer, or the main reason why you need to have those answers in your deck. especially if you're not like those heavy aggressive decks, is Minwoo will stop you dead in your tracks, and if you can't answer it, you will lose the game almost on the spot. And again, keeping in mind, Water, again, has stuff like Cloud of Darkness and Ultimacia, where they're gonna get the effects that they want to get. So this is a very devastating combo that I am that it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. So Minwoo, 100%. If you're playing Water, play 3 of them in your deck, no questions asked. And then Moogle, another card, just play 3 of it, no questions asked. It's an EX, it costs 1. Draw 2 cards and then discard a card from your hand. This card, and again, there could be multiple reasons, but it was eventually banned in Japan. Now, I don't know the exact reason behind that, but I will say that when you get to play this card for free and you get to just draw 2 cards and discard some dead card that you had in your hand, it's going to feel pretty great. Now, again, you're only netting, if you will, 2 crystal points, but drawing cards in this game, or even just breaking even on effects in this game, is very, very powerful. So when you consider a card like Moogle, even though it's deceptive because, again, look how cute he is, or it's only a 1 cost, this card does a lot for you, especially in Water decks. So this page right here, if you're building a Water deck, your deck should start with 3 copies of these 2 cards each. 100%, no questions asked. Ah, yes, good old Mime. A card that I am glad that they changed, but it's also very interesting how they changed it. So it's a 2-drop 4K. Not that exciting, I understand. When your attack phase starts, name an element, you get to basically change it to that element. And when Mime forms a party and attacks, draw a card. Now keep in mind, if we combo this with, say, Vaughn, Mime will trigger, you'll get to draw a card. Then, well, you can stack these how you want. Then Van will trigger, and you'll get to draw a card and discard a card. So you get to essentially draw 2 cards whenever the 2 of them attack and discard 1 of them. If you had just listened to how great Moogle was, you can even imagine how insane that is. Now, again, Mime here is a standard unit, so it gets buffed by Warrior of Light, and you can play the Waka back up to make it a 7K. Whew, you can very quickly see that there's a very powerful, or I should say, a lot of potential for a mono Water standard unit deck to pop up, because you're going to be drawing so many cards, and drawing cards in this game is effectively ramp, because the more cards you draw, the more cards you have to pitch and play more things. So you can really just filter through your deck fast and play multiple things in a turn if you have all these cards that you draw extra cards per turn. So again, I'm very, very excited to finally be playing a card game again where blue has some really strong effects to it for both drawing and bouncing your opponent's stuff back to their hand, which we haven't seen a lot of yet, but we will. Another very solid 2-drop backup. So again, keeping in mind that we're playing Minwoo, and it is one of the best backups in the game. Please do not underestimate this card. We then think, wow, if this card is so great, I want to be playing 3 copies of it. But what if I want to protect it? What kind of cards can I play that help make sure that Minwoo doesn't die? Because once my opponent realizes how good it is, they're going to be playing cards maybe next week, and they're going to play Sephiroth or Archer or these other cards that can break it. So then you go, oh wait, but I also have Yag, who says summons or abilities of your opponents must choose him if possible. And it's a 2-drop, so you get to play him on your turn 1. Again, I can't stress how relevant it is to have a 2-drop backup in your opening hand so you can play that turn 1 backup and not have to discard your entire hand. So again, in Water, we see these cards that just naturally go together, and you're like, hey, I can protect Minwoo, and let's say later on I draw extra copies of Minwoo. Well, guess what? You can just discard them for free, knowing that Yag, or maybe you're playing the 5-drop Aron that your backups can't be targeted by spells or abilities, and that one Minwoo is just going to stay on the field and wreak havoc for your opponent. So absolutely find ways to protect him. And then we have Yuge, which is a 3-drop. When it enters your field, draw 1 card, then place 1 card from your hand on bottom of your deck. Again, 3-drop, 7K, decent spot to be. Having the ability to card filter is certainly great as well. If you're not playing the standard unit focused deck, I definitely think that there's a spot for Yuge. It just depends on which way that you want your forwards to go. Then we have a 5-drop Yuna, very expensive EX, so that's always nice. When unit enters the field, choose one forward, return it to its owner's hand. Now again, keeping in mind this is your forward or your opponent, so you get that ability to choose which one you want to be bouncing. And again, if you have Cloud of Darkness in play, and let's say your opponent, was starting to recover from the first Cloud of Darkness, maybe they reveal this off the EX burst, you effectively get to bounce your Cloud of Darkness back to your hand, go into your turn, play Cloud of Darkness, and destroy their board yet again. Now, this is a bit more expensive for a backup, so that does limit it a bit, but it does have a secondary effect, which is very interesting. When a character is put from the field into the break zone, you may remove it from the game instead. And it's also very important that it says may. So there are cards like Devout that lets you get cards back from your break zone, cards like Sage that also lets you get cards back from your break zone. There are cards that'll say when it goes from field to break zone, you get a special effect, and Yuna just says no to all of that. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see how that shakes out and how often people are relying on those cards, but I could most certainly see this being a one or two of in water decks to kind of counter those effects. Again, it is kind of expensive. It's nice that it has an EX ability, but it just doesn't do... I can't see playing three of them in the same deck. Then we have Yuna, and this is the backup that I really, really do like in water decks. Now again, 2-drop backup, very good spot to be. The cost required to cast your water summons is reduced by 1. Now it can't be 0, it can't be free, all Moogle, but you'll find very quickly that reducing the cost even by 1 is extremely, extremely relevant in this game. And if we look to the right here, we see Leviathan, which is an EX, so you get the effect when it reveals off damage. It's a 3-drop. It used to be a 4-drop, and I will say I was perfectly fine with this card being a 4-drop, and now that they made it a 3-drop, and then, oh wait, Yuna can make it a 2-drop, I am 100% sold on this summon. Choose one forward, return to its owner's hand. So again, I've said this I think 3 times now, but I'll say it again. It's any forward, so you can either bounce your opponents forward in case they were trying to attack you, or you can bounce one of your own forwards to get that effect again. Just the versatility that this card will offer you it just speaks volumes to the amount of play that it has. So again, you don't always have to bounce your opponent's stuff. You could bounce your own cards if you want to. I think it's going to be a very, very strong summon going forward. And actually, I love the artwork as well, so I cannot wait to get foil versions of this card. Up next, we have Lila. When Lila deals damage to your opponent, draw 1 card. Now, this is a card that I want to see work, because drawing cards, again, in this game is absolutely absurd. And this is where I keep going back to, I could probably make a mono water deck, and you see Waka here to the right. Now, only Waka buffs it, so it only can get up to a 7k. And again, keep in mind, if we play Minwoo, they have to then block it with an 8k, so it's a little bit better. We do have stuff like Leviathan to bounce their guys out of the way, or maybe, you know what, we're playing Earth. Then this suddenly becomes an 8k that can't be broken by other, 7 or less. So it gets very aggressive, a very aggressive card. And we can either play things like Waka if we really want to make it a 9k. I know there were some other battle tricks in Wind that we could also play, or maybe you just want to, play a water fire deck, and let's say it's you play your red mage turn 1, and then you play Lila on turn 2, and then maybe by turn 3 you finally have it set up where you can choose whatever forward that they have in play. It can't block, and then Lila is going to hit through for the damage and let you draw a card. And then your opponent goes, wait, they have a red mage, so now they're disabling one of my blockers every turn, and Lila is able to keep connecting for damage and also gets to keep connecting them to draw them cards. So this is a very interesting card that I'm glad they only made a 6k instead of a 7k just for balancing reasons, that I think is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. Now again, going forward, keeping in mind, if we get more cards that'll say like your water cards gain X, or let's say that Earth gets more effects that can help with battle tricks, I think this is a card that can potentially see a lot of play. Again, the fact that it just says draw a card is absurd in this game. So I'm very much looking forward to finding out what is the best possible deck for this card and using it to its full advantage. 3-drop Waka. Forwards you control gain plus 1000 power. Again, I've kind of hinted at this the entire video, so hopefully you understand how important it is by now. If you're playing the mono water deck, either variations of them, 100% include this card because it's absolutely insane with Minwoo. However, I did struggle a little bit to find room to play this in a dual element deck where you're playing other non-water forwards. Now, if you're playing stuff that's already in 8K, maybe it's fine. You just have to be very careful about what forwards you're including in the deck, and maybe you just include the higher end of the earth element cards, so at least your water guys are getting the little buff that they need. Then the last dark card to talk about, the Emperor, which kind of again fits well with this since we talked about Minwoo. When the Emperor is put into the field into the break zone, from field into the break zone, you can search your deck for another copy of him and put it into the field dull. Now again, keeping in mind he is a 9000, so he works extremely well with Minwoo. Also keep in mind, if you remember, Chaos allows us to play multiple of the Emperors in play, so that's something else to consider as well. Now, it's just a great blocker to have because, again, you just get to search up another one and put it into play, and you probably killed two of their things in the process. So it's going to be interesting to see how this card plays out. Again, it's not over the top strong or anything like that, but it does have a good amount of utility to it. So I'm looking forward to playing the Emperor. I think he definitely has some form of potential. I don't know what that deck is yet, but I do look forward to brewing with him. Then moving into the water starters, and here is kind of the other card I was talking about, Shuyan. It's an EX burst effect, so again, that's just a strong ability to have. But when he enters the field, choose one forward cost 3 or less your opponent controls and return to its owner's hand. So even if we're playing a game where we have to spend, maybe we tap 2 backups and discard another card to play Shuyan into our backup, we're then bouncing one of their forwards where they most likely have to discard at least 1 card to play. So it definitely helps that tempo swing in your favor, and it can really help you get a problematic 3-drop off the board for a turn, namely Squall, so that you can attack and get through for that couple points of damage that turn you might not have otherwise been able to play. Now, it is a little bit awkward that it is a 4-drop, so you are spending a little bit more resources than I would like to, but at least it's bouncing a card, and if you can put this in a more aggressive deck, I think that's where it's really going to be able to do the majority of its heavy lifting, if you will. And just kind of a side note that the EX burst, even though it says enter the field, you still get it when it's off the top of your deck, and it is EX bursts. Even though it doesn't say here, they are may effects. So let's say for whatever reason you don't want to bounce one of their 3 or less drops. When you reveal this off damage, you don't have to. That is a rule that we learned. So please keep that in mind. I don't know of an instance off the top of my head where that would be relevant and you don't want to bounce one of their characters, but it's something to keep in mind nonetheless. Then we have 6-drop Titus, the last one of this effect. It's 1 cheaper for every Final Fantasy X forward you control. If you have a unit in play, it gains Brave, and if you have a unit that goes from field to break zone, you draw 2 cards. So again, keeping in mind we are 9 times out of 10 playing the 2-drop that gives you your water summons cost 1 less. So this is going to be probably around a 4 or 5 drop 9k that has Brave. That's a decent spot to be in. I wish it was a little bit better because again, if we're playing water, we're probably playing the Blitz Ace version instead. But I do love that artwork. I realize, yes, it's just stock artwork, but I wish it was a little bit more playable just for that reason, because it's just a beautiful card. And kind of the same with this Yuna. It's a sad spot to be in, because keep in mind, you can only have 1 Yuna between your forward and your backup. So you can't play the Yuna that makes your summons cheaper and this Yuna. You have to choose one or the other. But 2-drop 5k is an okay spot to be in. When you cast a summon, you may dull Yuna if it's active. If you do, draw a card. Again, this is kind of where I'm at. Well, drawing a card is a very, very strong effect, it turns out. So that's it's probably worth testing which one you want to play more. Now, it says any summon, it's not water summon. So then it gives you the opportunity to play other summons. If you want to play like a water lightning deck and you can play Odin's, then you can kill one of their guys and draw a card. And that's a very nice spot to be in. But I think for the water decks, I want to be playing the 2-drop backup Yuna because it makes Leviathan and Fairy cheaper. Then we have Lin. Whenever excuse me, it's a 2-drop backup is a good spot to be in. And when your opponent casts a summon activator, there's so many other good 2-cost backups to play. I just can't see this one being played. And then lastly, 4-drop Waka, 8,000. When Waka attacks, choose one forward you control. Until end of turn, it gains plus 1,000 power for each forward you control. So this is actually a really nice, if you can live the dream, if you will, and you can play the 4-drop Blitz Ace and play this Waka, you're going to make a very, very strong Titas, who's probably going to be winning the game that turn, especially if you have Minwoo in play, because it's just going to be a supercharged card. And then it also has a very interesting effect. Status reels only cost 1 water and discarding another Waka. Choose 1 forward until end of turn. It loses all abilities and becomes a 1,000 power. So this guy just also makes a very nice attacker, because, or even just a threat on defense, because being able to make them lose all their abilities is very relevant. Now let's think about Prishy, I believe is the name again, from Earth. Every time she blocks, she gains plus 4,000 power. You can say, no, I'm going to turn off that effect and make it a 1k for the remainder of this turn. So then your opponent is losing their best blocker, or maybe you just need to turn off a Squall for a turn. And what's really great is we have Brother. Remember, if you're playing Wind Water, you're able to play him to your backup, tutor up a Waka, and play Waka's status reel, very likely in the same turn because of how cheap it is. So that is definitely going to help out pushing through for those last couple points of damage. So it's going to be really exciting to see where Waka and Titus end up, and hopefully they are in the same deck, just for that bit of flavor. So guys, this was the last video. You can definitely look forward to some deck spotlights and duel series coming soon. That's what's going to be coming down the pipeline next. Oh god, it's very late. Sorry, I wanted to get out all these videos this week. So if you liked the video, please drop us a like. Let us know in the comments section below which elements you're looking forward to combining water with the most. And of course, make sure to subscribe. That helps us out a lot, and we most certainly appreciate all the subscriptions and anyone who shares these videos with their friends. We love doing the content for you guys, and we really want to help push the Final Fantasy TCG. So we're really excited to be doing some live games here very, very soon. Well guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the Opus 1 set review. Thank you so much for watching all of these videos, and we'll catch you on the next 6 Sages Gaming video. Have a good one.